This is my Garden of Eden project. Location of the Garden of Eden. Where was the Garden of Eden located? Well, no one can know for sure, but there are tantalising clues here and there that has kept the search going for a long time. And obviously God knows. It's like as if God is saying, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but here are some clues. You try and figure it out. So this is what I've been doing lately. And these are the results of my research. My investigation has led me to this location in Lebanon. The area Bekaa Valley, the closest suburb to the location is Deir Zanaun, if that's the way you pronounce it, and its surrounding suburbs. So I'll just show you that on Google Earth. Right there. There's Deir Zanaun. Let's have a little look around. Anti-Lebanon mountain range. This is the Bekaa Valley. This is the Lebanese mountain range. So this is the Bekaa Valley. Got the Lebanese mountain range. And the Anti-Lebanon mountain range. So from here you can see Lebanon. Got Syria. So my guess is that Eden was here. The garden being located in Eden, I reckon it was about here. The middle of the garden, here. Then you've got the two trees. The tree of knowledge, which was in the middle of the garden, and the tree of life, which was also in the middle of the garden, but seems to be more on the east. Some of the features in this area. Got a spring here, another one there, there, and there. Got a stream there, another one there. And they all flow into the Litani River. Litani River starts up here and flows down into the Mediterranean Sea. Other features, you've got an aquifer, well, underground water basin. very close to the area. Another interesting feature in this area is this depression that skirts the Anti-Lebanon mountain range that heads north up towards the Euphrates River. See how it skirts the Anti-Lebanon mountain range, and south that eventually heads up towards the Jordan River. So getting back to the proposed location of the Garden of Eden, so what are the clues that point to this location? We've got scriptures in Genesis, Ezekiel, and of all places, Song of Solomon. Let's have a look at those scriptures. Genesis 2, 8 to 14. You can put this on pause and have a read of it. Genesis 2 verse 19 and 20. Genesis 3 verse 24. Genesis 4 verse 2, 3, 8, 12, 16. Then we have Ezekiel 31, 1 to 18. And then scriptures in Song of Solomon. Chapter 4, 7 to 16. And a couple of others in chapter 5 verse 1 and chapter 8 verse 13. So why Lebanon? Well, firstly, in Ezekiel 31 verse 3 describes the Assyrian world power as a very large cedar tree in the land of Lebanon. But at verses 9, 16 and 18, it describes that same tree as in the Garden of Eden. I'll show you. So verse 3, there was an Assyrian, a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches like a shady thicket, lofty in stature, its top was among the clouds. Verse 9, I made it beautiful, that's God, made it beautiful with abundant foliage, and all the other trees of Eden, the garden of the true God, envied it. Verse 16 and 18, at the sound of its downfall, I will cause nations to shudder when I bring it down to the grave, along with all those going down into the pit, and all the trees of Eden, the choicest and the best of Lebanon, all that are well watered, will be comforted in the land down below. Verse 18, which of the trees of Eden was like you in glory and greatness? But you will certainly be brought down with the trees of Eden. The second reason, in Genesis chapter 2, it mentions 4 rivers. Euphrates, the Hiddekel River, which is the Tigris, which is the east of Assyria. A third river in a location called Cush, which has often been identified as the area south of Egypt. And a fourth river in a location called Havilah, which has often been identified as the area of northern Arabia. So Lebanon is situated between the 2 northern rivers, that's the Euphrates and Tigris, and the 2 rivers in the south, Pishon and Gihon. We'll just show you that on Google Earth. So here we have Egypt, Cush, which is south of Egypt. That's where the river Gihon was. The other one, which cuts across northern Arabia, well, there's Arabia, North Arabia would be around here somewhere. It's a river cut across there somewhere. Then you've got the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. So Lebanon being here seems to fit the clues pretty well. What's interesting about this river Pishon that cuts across the land of Havilah or northern Arabia, it's in Genesis chapter 2 verse 11. See here, the name of the first is Pishon. It is the one encircling the entire land of Havilah, northern Arabia, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. And note, have a look here. The best gold in the land, called the cradle of gold. Located right here. I think that King Solomon might have got all his gold mainly from this area here. So the third reason why we say Lebanon is in the book of Song of Solomon. King Solomon describes the beauty of the Shulamite girl and compares her to all the finest attractions and highlights of his kingdom, whereas the shepherd boy describes her as a stunningly beautiful garden with lots of beautiful trees and flowers and streams and springs of water. But for some reason this garden is described as all locked up. Now, of all gardens to describe the most beautiful woman in his life, especially having a Jewish background, it appears that the shepherd boy is describing her as the Garden of Eden. And then regarding it all being locked up, the Garden of Eden was certainly locked up because the two cherubs were stationed there to stop Adam and Eve from re-entering it, so as not to get to the tree of life. Now, of particular note is the references to her coming from Lebanon. So have a look at Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 8, 11 and 15. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride, come with me from Lebanon. This is the shepherd boy speaking to her. In verse 11, the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. And then verse 15, you are a garden spring, a well of fresh water and flowing streams from Lebanon. And 12, notice there it says, my sister, my bride is like a locked garden, a spring sealed shut. So anyway, notice the references to Lebanon in those three verses. So why have we zoned in on the Bekaa Valley? Well, firstly, at Ezekiel 31, verse 4 and 15, the trees of Eden are described as trees of the field, not of the hills or the mountains. And as we saw in Lebanon, there's a lot of mountains. Secondly, Ezekiel 31 verse 16 mentions that the trees of Eden are the choicest and best of Lebanon, all that are well watered. Now that expression, the choicest and best of Lebanon, cannot refer to all of Lebanon, but has to be a region within Lebanon. Agriculturally speaking, the Bekaa Valley is the choicest and best of Lebanon. The third reason, Genesis chapter 2 verse 19 and 20 says that God brought flying creatures, all the domestic animals, and every wild animal of the field to Adam for him to name. Ezekiel 31 verse 6 says that all the birds of the sky, and similarly all the wild animals of the field, came to the location of that massive cedar tree in Lebanon to give birth. So this must include migratory animals, that is, all the wild animals of the field. Migratory animals are often in huge packs and herds. The only area in Lebanon that could accommodate a breeding ground for hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of them, is the Bekaa Valley. This valley plain is 10 to 20 kilometres wide and close to 150 kilometres long. The Bekaa Valley is also a stopping point for migratory birds. Another interesting point, the garden doesn't appear to have been very close to the ocean, but there is no mention of Adam naming the sea creatures. So the fourth reason, regarding the big cedar tree in the Garden of Eden, Ezekiel 31 states, the waters made it grow big, the deep springs of water. It's in verse 4. Also streams were all around. Verse 5, abundant waters were in its streams. Verse 7, its roots, that's the roots of that tree, went down into abundant waters. And verse 15, I'll cover over the deep waters and hold back its streams so that the abundant waters are restrained. The trees of the field will all wither away. Now what's interesting about those verses is that the whole country of Lebanon sits on a large, complex, underground natural water reservoir. So here's the picture of the world where all the underground water is. Cream colour is local and shallow aquifers. Remember, aquifers are underground water basins or reservoirs. Green is complex hydrogeological structures, which can be either deep or shallow waters, and blue is major groundwater basins. So it's zoning on the Lebanon area. See, it's green, which means there's a lot of water in that area, deep and shallow. To this day, the Bekaa Valley is still a well-watered region. Many of the farmers in this region tap into the natural underground water sources that exist there. We'll just go to Google Earth and I'll show you that. Look at all the farmland right through the Bekaa Valley. So many of these farmers tap into the underground water source right through this whole area. Agriculturally speaking, this area certainly is the choicest and best of Lebanon. An interesting point regarding Ezekiel 31 verse 15, there explains how God over time covered over, held back and restrained those underground waters, most likely by seismic events. It doesn't say that God dried them up or destroyed them. So this would indicate that the groundwaters that once watered the garden are still there. It's just that they no longer come to the surface as much as they once did. Those waters contributed to the fame Lebanon once had for the trees and forests that once filled the whole land. So we've identified Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. So why Deir Zenaun and the surrounding area as the location of the Garden of Eden? Well, first, Genesis chapter 2 verse 8 says, God planted a garden in Eden Notice this towards the east. We're assuming that Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley is correct. The garden must be located on the east side of the Bekaa Valley. Dierzenaun is east of the Bekaa Valley. Secondly, Song of Solomon 4 verse 8 mentions a Shulamite girl, which seems to be pictured as the Garden of Eden, as coming down from the peak of Amana and the peak of Sinai. Well, here Sinai is another name for Mount Hermon. These peaks, that's Amana and Sinai, are part of the eastern anti-Lebanon mountain range at the southern end. The peak of Mount Hermon is about 45 kilometers southeast of the proposed location of the garden, and the peak of Amana about 25 kilometers northeast. Let's have a look at that. So coming in from this angle, crossing the Lebanese mountains, there's the Bekaa Valley. See the blue? Mount Hermon's over there. And Amana is this area here, one of the peaks in this area. Let's go a bit closer. It's Peak Amana. And Peak Sinai, which is, as we said, Mount Hermon. So from the Garden of Eden location, the proposed location, if we can just see the Peak of Hermon there. And the Amana over there. So the third reason, mentioned at Genesis 3 verse 24, Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden on its eastern border. Well, that is where the cherubs were posted to prevent them re-entering the garden. But it appears that Adam and Eve thereafter didn't travel too far from that area and relocated somewhere east of the garden. Because later, when Cain was expelled, Genesis 4 verse 16 says that he took up living east of Eden in the land of exile. So where might Adam and Eve have settled? There's a few more clues. Genesis 4 says that Cain became a cultivator of the ground. He brought fruits of the land as an offering. Verse 8, he assaulted his brother in the field. So in the field, this could possibly imply that Adam and Eve, along with their growing family, lived in an area near plains or fields, which would have been suitable for growing crops, most likely next to a reliable water source, such as a river or a lake. There are 3 large fields east of the proposed location that fit this description. They are Kfir Yabus, Medea, and Damascus. And the area where Cain took up dwelling after being expelled could have been the Syrian desert. Let's have a look at that at Google Earth. So from this angle, Syrian desert is over there. So now heading eastward, heading over the Lebanese mountains, crossing the Bekaa Valley. Now look here in the Lebanese mountain range. This area that could have been used for cultivating land. There's that area there. Notice there's a river there that goes down to Damascus. Looks like the river starts up here. And then further out, the land of exile, where Cain wandered about. It seems a very likely location. So Adam and Eve could have easily settled one of these three locations here. Or maybe this bit over here. Cain, later being expelled, wandered around in this area because it says east of the Garden of Eden. So the fourth reason, Genesis chapter 2 verse 10 says, "Now there was a river flowing out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 rivers." A good candidate for the river flowing out of Eden is the Litani River and the stream that flows past Deir Zenaun. In the past, instead of flowing into the Litani River, east to west as it does now, if the Litani River was the Eden River, then I propose that the Litani River flowed west to east, up the stream towards the base of the Anti-Lebanon mountain range, and then divided. One branch of the river would have headed north along the eastern depression that skirts the Anti-Lebanon mountain range to eventually join the Orontes or Asir River, which is further north. The other branch would have headed south along the eastern depression till it joined the Hasbani Jordan River system. So let me show you that. So there's the Litani River and the streams that run into it. Flows south and goes into the Mediterranean Sea over there. What I proposed in the past, the course of the river was different. I reckon it would have been like that. Flowing up to the base of the Anti-Lebanon mountain range, and then from there splitting, one river going north and the other river going south. The northern one would have met up with the Orontes River, which is in yellow there, and the southern one would have met up with the Jordan River. The Orontes River would have connected to the Euphrates, possibly along there. And then somehow split later on to become the Tigris River, possibly there. And down the bottom, Southern River would have followed the Jordan Valley Rift, which goes down here and headed towards Kush. And the other one across northern Arabia. Note, after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden on the east, the north-flowing and south-flowing rivers could thereafter have served as a natural barrier preventing anyone from re-entering the garden from another location, especially if the rivers were deep, fast-flowing and wide. These two rivers would have thus served as the eastern border of not only the garden, but also of Eden itself. Another note, the tree of life only needed to be guarded by the cherubs only until the tree died. So I guess thereafter anyone could have gone into that area. So what was the shape of the Garden of Eden? Genesis 2 verse 9 says both the tree of knowledge, also in chapter 3 verse 3, and the tree of life were in the middle of the garden. But the tree of life seems to have also been located on the east of the garden, because that's where the cherubs were stationed to prevent anyone going back into the garden. Now, if the garden was round or squarish, the tree of life could not be both in the middle of the garden and on the east. But if the garden was elongated or rectangular in shape, it could be both east and in the middle. Therefore, the garden must have been longer from north to south and its width narrower from west to east. So as we showed before, this is why it's like this. The middle of the garden, tree of life in the middle, tree of knowledge in the middle. That would make sense if the tree of life was on the east, because remember the cherubs were stationed on the east of the garden. That's where Adam and Eve were expelled. The cherubs were placed there to prevent them getting to the tree of life, or the path to the tree of life. So it appears that the tree of life could have been on the east. Therefore, this would be the shape of the garden. So why are the proposed north and south flowing rivers not there anymore? Well, fault line, that's earthquake fault lines and tectonic activity have modified the landscape over the centuries and continue to do so. The Jordan Valley Rift has a high concentration of seismic activity due to the complex movements of the Arabian Plate, the African Plate, Indian Plate, Eurasian Plate, Anatolian Plate, and many other smaller fault lines. Have a look at these pictures. There's the Mediterranean Sea, Cyprus, Red Sea over here. Look, this is a picture of all the earthquakes in the area. It follows that Jordan Valley Rift. Here's another one. Here's the Anatolian Plate up here, Eurasian Plate here, moving this way, Indian Plate, African Plate. See the way it's moving? This Palmyra fold belt here, that's right next to the proposed location. That would have easily distorted the land profile. Got the Dead Sea transform here. Actually, if you go to Google Earth, you can see this line here in the water. See here? So the Arabian Plate, that's moving this way, and the African Plate, I think, is moving northward. But you can see where it's splitting here. And look at the shoreline on this side, on the Arabian side, and then the shoreline on the African side. You can easily put them together. So obviously this area is widening. So obviously in the past, it was much narrower. So at one stage, it was joined together. And as it opened, it eventually became a river. As it opened further, it became the Red Sea. So at one stage, it definitely was a river through here. That's the Jordan Valley Rift. Got the Indian plate over here. Anatolian plate. Eurasian plate through there. Here's some other pictures. See here, they reckon eventually this whole chunk of Africa, the Horn of Africa, will all come apart. And that the sea will go right through there. So this will form an island or a small continent. Here's a world map. And see this one's quite interesting. So here's the Lebanon mountain range, anti-Lebanon mountain range, Bekaa Valley. See how the Bekaa Valley section here is dropping, sinking. Then see the Latana River here and the Orentis or Asir River up here. And then you've got this interesting feature here, as if it's moving apart. A lot of tectonic activity right through this area, which would have definitely altered the landscape or the land profile. This is another Google picture I found. So the proposed location of the garden is right here. And look here, here's a fault line here. You've got the Lebanese mountain fault line there. Here's the anti-Lebanon mountain fault line. So I've got a fault line here and one here. That would have easily altered the elevation profile here. Because just in this area it's sunk a little bit. From about here to here, it goes higher. So obviously you need a river to go from a high point to go down. So at one point, this probably would have been the highest point to allow a river to go this way and to allow the other river to go north this way and meet up with the Orentis River, which is about here. So where are the Gihon, Pishon rivers? The Gihon River most likely is the Red Sea. The Red Sea is continually widening, as we mentioned. So the distance between the African and Arabian plates increases on a daily basis. Every so often a large rip occurs, as was reported in 2006, reported on NBC News. Note what they said. Over a period of 3 weeks, the crust on the sides of the rift moved apart by 26 feet. That's about 8 meters in a 3-week period. We knew about the steady rifting process in Afar. Afar is the triple junction, Afar triple junction. I'll just quickly show you that, just here. So we knew about the steady rifting process in Afar as Arabia moves away from Africa across the rift, Wright said. And we knew that occasionally the strain that builds up slowly over centuries is released suddenly in rifting episodes. We did not know how big the deformation could be. On average, the two sides move apart about 2 centimetres per year, but as this event demonstrates, the motion is episodic and jerky. So on average 2 centimetres a year, but this episode indicates that the widening process could have been much quicker than they think, because they think it may have taken millions of years before Africa and Arabia split, but this shows that it could have been much, much earlier. So in the past, the Red Sea was a river, and very likely the Gihon River that encircled the land of Cush. The Pishon River may possibly be an ancient, now dried up riverbed that cuts across the Arabian Peninsula and finishes at the Persian Gulf. Could we show you that one? Right across there. Just zoom down into that and get a closer look. Can you see this dent in the ground, in the land? You can see it. So once you get to about here, it gets lost a little bit. But it appears that the river definitely went through somewhere here to meet up with the Red Sea, or this used to be the Gihon River. So can you see how the one river up in the Garden of Eden became 4 rivers? That's how I suspect it was. So 1 turns into 4. Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, and Gihon. What was the Garden of Eden like? The following are words and expressions I've picked out from the clues at Genesis, Ezekiel, and Song of Solomon. And the picture it paints is just beautiful. Just really shows you how amazing the garden was. Every tree pleasing to look at and good for food. A river flowing toward the garden. Every wild animal of the field and every flying creature of the heavens. Deep springs of water. Streams were all around. Channels watered all the trees of the field. The abundant waters in the streams. Imagine living there. All the birds of the sky nested there, and all the wild animals of the field gave birth there. Cedars, juniper trees, plane trees, abundant foliage, choicest and the best. Fragrance, perfume, comb, honey and milk. A paradise of pomegranates with the choicest fruits, with henna along with spikenard plants, spikenard and saffron, cane and cinnamon, with all sorts of trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, along with all the finest perfumes. A garden spring, a well of fresh water and flowing streams. I like this part in Song of Solomon. Awake, O north wind, come in, O south wind, breathe upon my garden, let its fragrance spread. Imagine the aroma of the garden just wafting across the Bouquet Valley. Myrrh and spice, honeycomb and honey, wine and milk. What a stunningly beautiful home Jehovah gave our first parents. So finally, did the Garden of Eden have a name? Interesting question. If the Shulamite girl in the book of Song of Solomon really is described as the Garden of Eden, could the Garden of Eden have been named Shulam, since the girl is called a Shulamite? Here's an interesting quote. The name Shulamite appears to be based on the familiar word shalom, meaning peace, which in turn is derived from the verb shalem, to be or make whole or complete. I thought, how appropriate as a name for the Garden of Eden. As long as Adam and Eve were obedient and faithful to God, they enjoyed total peace with God, the animals, the land, with nature, with each other, and in heart, mind, and soul. In every way, physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, they were complete. Their being blessed with such a magnificent God-given home was simply a reflection of the wonderful peace and completeness they enjoyed. So Shulam. I know it's just a thought, but what an appropriate name for the Garden of Eden.